Hi, welcome along to the Aspiring Psychologist podcast. I am Dr. Marianne Trent and I'm a qualified clinical psychologist. So we are now at the start of interview season for clinical psychology anyway. As of the Friday just gone, which was the 17th of March, you should have heard by now if you are being offered an interview for this year's clinical psychology doctorate interviews. So fingers crossed you have. So as ever, there are our compassionate Q&A dates that we've got coming up. We've had the first one, which I'll admit was supposed to be on the 13th of March. And I'm very sorry to say that I forgot. It was just clean overlooked in my diary. So I was settling down, watching some TV, and someone from my membership messaged me to say, oh my God, tonight's session in the membership was amazing, but I'm sorry that it meant that I missed a compassionate Q&A. And I was like, oh dear. Oh, wow. I forgot to do it. So I did it the next day instead. I did it on Tuesday, the 14th of March, and it was really well received. And if you didn't catch it, you can watch it on replay on my YouTube channel, Dr. Marianne Trent. If you can't see it right away, toggle to the bit that says live broadcasts and it will be in there. Or you can look on the playlist. It's definitely in there for the Q&A sessions. Okay, so the second of the dates that we've got coming up is on Monday, the 17th of April, 2023 at 7:30 p.m. I will try to make sure I remind myself a bit better this time so that it definitely happens at that time. I'm very sorry if you were looking for it and you were inconvenienced in any way. And then the final of the series is Tuesday, the 5th of May. 2023, 7:30 p.m. So hope you'll find those really useful. So if you would welcome some extra support at this time, then do please consider coming on board to the Aspiring Psychologist membership, because people have found it to be such a useful resource. It's honestly been a lovely thing to put together and see come to fruition so beautifully. So there's more information about that in the show notes, or you can go to my website, www.goodthinkingpsychology.co.uk. So today we are thinking about slightly earlier stages of career, but also learning a little bit more about faith and culture. And something that you may or may not know much about is Islamic psychology. So I thought it would be really useful to speak to somebody who's based in a different country and to get a bit of an understanding about him. His name's Khaled, and what he's studying, how he's studying it, and how faith and culture impact on him, and what he's learning and what he's understanding. So hope you'll find this to be a really useful episode, and I'll look forward to catching up with you on the other side. So I want to welcome along our guest today, Khaled, to the podcast. Hi, Khaled.
Hi everyone.
So I know people are probably getting bored of hearing me say it, but we did meet on LinkedIn, didn't we?
Yes, like everyone else for sure.
I love LinkedIn. And we got chatting because you'd heard Alicia's podcast episode that I did with her, thinking about faith and values. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like the first thing, other than LinkedIn, it was also Alicia's podcast. Like I saw the episode on my LinkedIn, also LinkedIn again, and I was like, oh wow, this is really interesting. I'm gonna like listen to it, and then I followed it like directly after I listened, because I honestly wanted to listen to more and more from the podcast. So I was really curious on that.
Great, thank you. Why did that podcast episode specifically resonate with you in the way it did, do you think?
First of all, like personally, anyway, I believe that faith is like generally disregarded as something that can improve or worsen a person's mental state. Some people can be traumatized by faith, and then they have a worse mental state. Some people can be totally enhanced in terms of like what they think, or their anxiety lessens or something like that, or the depression is lessened or decreased. So I was thinking, okay, wow, like what both of you were asking and replying with was just like really insightful information, and like something that more people could honestly use. That's it.
Thank you. I just sneezed. Thank you. I was listening as I sneezed.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm really glad that resonated with you and that you liked the style of questioning.
Mm.
And as we speak right now, you are not in the UK. So we've had to kind of organise a time for recording that meant that you weren't up in the middle of the night and neither were I. So do you want to tell people a little bit, as you feel comfortable to, where in the world you're speaking to us from?
Yeah. I currently reside in the UAE. So it's 4 hours ahead of Dr. Trent's timing. So right now it's about 11:30, 11:45 for her, and it's about 3:45 p.m. for me right now. So yeah, just 4 hours difference. Not too much, thankfully, but not too little either. So it's totally fine for my schedule anyway.
Brilliant. Did you manage to get across to go and see any of the World Cup in Qatar? Were you able to get there?
Oh, yeah, a lot. Some people I knew from university actually went there, but no, unfortunately, I didn't. I didn't.
No, not for you. Not for you.
Yeah, I saw like one
Okay.
or a few games just from TV, but not actually going there. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So, why did this episode resonate with you particularly? So, we know you're an aspiring clinical psychologist, but what stage of your career are you at the moment?
So I'm in my bachelor's degree, so I'm in my foundation year, and I have 3 years to go after foundation year. So it's technically foundation year is the first year before the 3 years where the psychology program actually like starts and ramps up in difficulty and quantity. So I have 4 years to go for bachelor's, and then after that is the postgraduate studies. So I'm literally in my first year of university.
Great. And I understand that you are at a UK university, but a foreign campus. Is that right?
Exactly. So I'm studying in the University of Birmingham, Dubai right now, and University of Birmingham, like in Edgbaston, was around since 1900. But my university has only been around for a couple of years now, and like as let alone at this new campus, because it used to be an old one, which I never even visited. But they have the new campus, which opened only about 2 years ago, if I'm not wrong. And that was when they started hosting the same programs, the same content as in the Edgbaston campus, but just in the Middle East, in Dubai specifically.
That's amazing, because actually some of the tricky bits about people moving from different countries to the UK or even internationally is whether the qualifications are recognised, whether they're the same. But if it's the same qualification, then you get none of that. So presumably, if your course is the equivalent to the British one, you'd potentially be eligible for registration with the British Psychological Society. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Because as far as I'm aware, anyway, I could be wrong, or maybe there could be changes. I'm not sure, but at least as of right now, from how much I'm aware, if the British Psychological Society approves of the Birmingham psychology degree, and like this is the same university, it's even the same module. Even on Canvas, we also use Canvas, and the presentations are there. Literally everything is there. That's the same. If Edgbaston has the BPS accreditation, then surely, as far as I'm aware, Birmingham Dubai should have it as well, or at least I think they're trying to get it. Maybe in 1 or 2 years, it might change. I'm not 100% sure. I think as of right now they don't have it, but they're like going to get it, like to get the accreditation in a year or two max. I hope so.
Brilliant, brilliant. But that, even if you don't end up with the accreditation, still having the same training, the same experience, the same skills, and on your transcript is, if you do want to work internationally one day, that's gonna it's gonna really future proof you so well. So yeah, well done to Birmingham Dubai campus, because that sounds like a great idea. And I guess at the end of the day, universities are businesses and they're money-making endeavors, aren't they? And
Exactly.
it's all about academia. We're bettering people, but actually, the bottom line is they want to make money, and their business
Exactly.
of
It's
making
literally.
money is by educating people. And so, if they can see there's a gap in the market, then they're going to exploit that. But I think that's a pretty savvy one. I'm pretty impressed with that.
Exactly. If I may add something,
Sure.
University of Birmingham Dubai is the first Russell Group university to be anywhere in the Middle East. We've had other universities from the UK before. We've had right now in Dubai we have Heriot-Watt, for example, but like we don't have any Russell Group universities. So Exeter, Leeds, those aren't in Dubai or Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Qatar or anywhere else in the Middle East. But Birmingham was like, okay, we'll put Birmingham Dubai in Dubai, where it's literally one of the most popular places for tourism and so on. And we're gonna have lots of Arabs to join our university. So it was honestly a smart financial move. Like I gotta be honest.
I think so. Might set up an aspiring psychologist Dubai program. Yeah, very smart, very savvy. Okay, so what led you to wanting to pursue a career in psychology?
Yeah. So basically, as a kid, I used to always flip from job to job, like in terms of like a dream career, you know. So I used to think, oh, I want to be a baker. Okay, never mind. I want to be a movie director. I actually want to be a video game creator. So like I thought of like so many different things, right? And then like high school hit, like towards almost the end of high school, and I was still not even sure what I wanted to do, like as a job, as a career, what major to go into university, like none of that, right? Honestly, like I was so behind. And then basically, uh, like it was basically kind of two factors. But the first one was when I signed up to do AP Psychology, the Advanced Placement Psychology, that my school was like offering. You know, that they offered APs back then. So I chose to do AP Psychology. But the thing is also, what's it called? It's a self-study AP. So I didn't have a teacher, right? Like I'm just studying by myself and what the school like offered me. So maybe sometimes they'd offer exams or chapters of like the Barron's book to read, you know. So they'd make sure like, okay, you're reading everything, but they were also not that serious at the same time because it was post-COVID and everybody was just lacking in terms of their efforts at school. So like it was both like half from what my school side was offering. And advanced placement, by the way, like a side note, it's the equivalent, the American equivalent to a British A level. So they're basically kind of the same thing. If you're going to American universities, generally speaking, they might ask for APs. Obviously, if you're going to UK universities, they might ask for A levels. So it's like sort of like an equivalent-ish. But basically, AP Psychology, that was like a first thing. It really helped, to be totally honest, because it like offered me so much insight into it. I was studying from like the Barron's book, Princeton book, like lots of sources as well, just for that one exam. And it really like informed me, of course, of what psychology actually was and different types of it, and different even sometimes different self-defense mechanisms I learned from Barron's and like for the AP for the advanced placement exam. Like I learned countless, like so much valuable info just from that advanced placement exam. I still have like my books. It's been 2 years and I still have my books from the AP because I just like cherish it that much. But a second thing, other than the AP, was like my own personal like struggles with mental health. Like it sounds even redundant at this point, but I like genuinely like back then, I struggled with like overthinking or having like sort of like body insecurities, if you can call it that. And like and later on, as time went on, especially 2 years ago, I formed a much better like perception of myself, did better habits, and I was wondering like what I could do because I knew people around me as well that suffered either mentally or emotionally or whatnot. So I was wondering like, okay, what if I could attribute this what I've done for myself, even if in just a life coach way, to help other people and like spread some goodness or knowledge I learned, whether it's psychology or just from my own like introspection or experiences. What could I do to like to not save people's lives, but even like sometimes clinical psychologists do save people's lives. So I also thought about how do I help people mentally, diagnosing disorders and preventing suicides. Like I thought that stuff would be extremely fulfilling for me. So it's both the advanced placement and my own personal experiences and experiences of people around me that made me want to pursue psychology.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think it's always interesting thinking about what brings us to the profession. And speaking as a Middle Eastern man, how is mental health handled or considered or referred to by people, around you?
Yeah. Okay. So it totally depends from country to country, to be honest, because I feel like the UAE is much more open in terms of inviting international people and employees, which obviously how Birmingham Dubai exists. It's obviously from another country, but they managed to make the whole university here and lots of the same programs and everything. Even obviously some staff from England, for example, are working here. So it depends from country to country. The UAE has been really good, I feel like, in my personal opinion, from what I know anyway, at having more psychology programs and allowing more people to teach psychology. But for example, in a country like where I'm from Syria. In Syria, like mental health is like barely discussed. Lots of people don't really like know about it. Some people might like feel really bad, but maybe they'll just attribute it to religion, or it's, oh, I have no friends, or like no active social life, or maybe they just like have bad habits or something. They don't really like acknowledge like, okay, maybe it's this habit or it's this disorder that's causing this thing, and we'll try to work from there, or maybe it's this medication you need. Like Syria, it's not really that common. Like I know someone personally, a woman personally from Syria, because we've been having we have had the civil war for like years now, right? So her son actually would sometimes scream in the middle of the night, like literally post-traumatic stress disorder, would literally scream in the middle of the night because like he would hear like bombs like before as a really young kid. And then she told me like, oh, they'd go to a psychiatrist and they'd give him medication, but it wouldn't really help out for the long term. And then he would just keep doing the same behavior. So it really depends. Like Syria, the situation there has just not that been good from a psychology standpoint. The UAE, it's been really good. And I think I can't be sure, of course, but I think some other countries, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, they've been better, like in terms of employing more psychologists and stuff like that, getting more people from abroad to teach in those countries. But it's still like not as good or not as advanced as somewhere like America, Germany, the UK. And of course, another thing to add is that the psychology standpoint and knowledge is so much better nowadays in the Middle East compared to like 20 years ago, 15 years ago. People would just barely even know of it, let alone bring it up. But like now it's becoming much better. People are getting more aware. Life coaches, for example, are kind of helping it out, even if it's not necessarily psychologists. Life coaches, for example, they do kind of bring up, oh, mental health is this, how to do good habits is that. And, life coaches are helping out as well. But I know personally some Arab life coaches from people I know that they've told me, oh, this guy's really good, this woman's really good. But psychology, it's improving, but it's still not there yet. Not like America, UK, Austria, so on.
Yeah, so it sounds like some of our Western approaches to mental health are sort of filtering through. And certainly with the UK universities being present on the soil, that might well speed that up a bit as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't even have much to add because, the UK having their universities here, I feel like it's also helping quite a bit. Like I think even 10 years ago or so, 15 years ago, the UAE didn't have one single psychology degree, if I'm not mistaken. So now it's getting like it's accelerating.
Yeah, yes, building its momentum for sure. Okay. And once you've done your undergraduate degree, have you got an idea about what you might do next?
That's such a good question. So I'm really fascinated by clinical psychology for sure. Diagnosing disorders and like really going in depth, like something like a social worker or a mental health counselor wouldn't do. So I would want to like go more in depth and tackle more like serious trauma, more long-term stuff. I kind of thought that psychiatry like is sort of the same thing, but I thought it didn't really appeal to me as much because I don't want to have like shallow sessions and just give medication at the end. I thought I wanted to like form like good relationships with clients. Of course, only during the time. Of course, you can't talk, as far as I'm aware, you can't socialize with your clients during and after sessions, like, oh yeah, did you go to this restaurant? So nice. Like, no, you have to only talk in the office. So I would like personally love doing that. And also because like I'm a Muslim, and I learned quite a bit about Islamic psychology, and honestly, it also seems like really interesting to me how like faith and psychology are actually intertwined, and like what how faith can either accelerate or worsen someone's mental health. I feel like faith is just generally not discussed, like Muslim or otherwise, how like maybe other people might just be mentally scarred, or maybe they have wrong perceptions, or maybe they might just have something wrong in terms of their faith, and maybe that's what's like not being addressed. Because generally, from what I've learned, psychology doesn't really address impacts that things like religion have. So Islamic psychology would be like really interesting to delve into. So it's either clinical or Islamic, though I've always thought more about clinical, and I'm more familiar with clinical. So yeah.
Could you tell us a bit more about Islamic psychology, if you can?
Okay, so I'm not an Islamic psychologist myself, but essentially, if I'm not wrong, so basically in Islam, we believe that there's four things. Like I speak from a Muslim also. We usually have four things like to take care of. So we have the heart, which is basically your emotions, which means qalb in Arabic. jasad, or the body, so like, your physical self, ruh, which is your spirit, so like, spiritually, and also so the heart, the soul, and the mind, so mentally. So you basically have spiritual, emotional, physical, mental. So you have these four aspects are intertwined to make like a good uh being, a good being and a role model, and someone that would do in this life. And as in Islam, we also believe that there's a next life, either heaven or hell. So that we believe. So for example, if I have really good relationships, and I have a good spiritual health, so maybe I'm practicing my religion all the time, but I have horrible physical health, so I'm always going to doctors, and I have, I'm always getting really tired, and maybe I'm a smoking addict, so I can't feel relaxed without a cigarette. So basically, this doesn't really constitute a full like human being in wellness, because the physical part is always taking away from the other parts as well, and it's worsening your overall like existence in this life. So you might be worse off in sports or other physical activities, or outings with family or friends. So that's why, for example, all four of these, like generally speaking, in Islamic psychology, must be considered, not just physical, mental, emotional. Like this, the spiritual is also important. So obviously, maybe sometimes from an Islamic scholar's point of view, maybe you have these three aspects, but the spiritual isn't up to par. So maybe you're gonna need to practice more in order to feel actually more fulfilled, and then have a good like well-being overall. All these four: spiritual, physical, mental, emotional.
Great, thank you. That's really interesting as an idea. And I guess you might have heard me talk about on the podcast before. It's like having your ducks in a row, or at least knowing which ducks it is you're trying to tame, isn't it? And yeah, when we look at Maslow's hierarchy, if your health is impaired, that's going to really impact on your ability to move up that pyramid. It's also
Yeah.
interlinked. So I really like that explicit focus on those four areas. And I think sometimes when we've got some of our ducks in a row, or if you've got three of those areas that are actually looking pretty good, pretty shiny, it does then perhaps give you the impetus to think, let's see what we can do about that fourth one. Let's see how we can to get that more in line with the others where I want to be, because it might be holding me back from my goals or stopping me from being as well as I can be.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe, for example, you might always be devoted to your relationships, but then your mental health, it might be bad, because maybe you might be more people pleasing, or maybe you'll just do or say things that you normally wouldn't do, just for the emotional aspect and not the mental one. So you're just ignoring your mental health and your own sense of peace. That's another thing. So they're all related in Islamic psychology, even clinical, obviously, but usually clinical psychologists exclude the spiritual. So Islamic psychology considers the spiritual as well as the other three, not just spiritual and not just the other three. So it's all four.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think it's okay to combine the two. I think it's okay for you to be an Islamic clinical psychologist. So, of course, certainly when we're working in the NHS, we're not using faith interventions, but I think it's absolutely okay to talk about, well, I understand as an Islamic male, or a Muslim, or whatever you want to introduce yourself as I understand it, this is the learnings of my faith. This is how we understand it. But you're not saying you should do this, or you should do that. You're offering clients a different way of looking at things to see if things resonate with them. So, yeah, I'm okay with bringing myself to therapy. So, I'm not sharing my woes. I'm not, I'm not sharing all this deep personal information, but I will happily share that I'm a parent, and I'm a parent of two boys, and I'm married. And you might well know from listening to the podcast that my dad died in 2017. So I'm happy to share that basic information with clients if it's relevant, because I think it helps you to be a human first and a psychologist second. And because it just offers you some context and makes you feel more like a tangible human rather than some robotic therapist, So as you go through your training, you might well develop some competence and confidence in just weaving in appropriate amounts of yourself into the work you do with people without it being all about you, because it shouldn't be all about us.
Exactly, yeah. Like I sometimes think that I'm like, okay, maybe I've seen before that some therapists say, or that maybe something that therapists can sometimes do, not always, but sometimes do, is they bring up their own details so that the clients can resonate with them, but not to the point where the therapist becomes like the client and they switch roles. Like no, like the therapist can sometimes say some details, one or two or something, so that the client can like relate to them or think like, okay, this is a normal human being thing, and it's totally fine to feel this way or to have something that happened this way.
Exactly, and actually, a good catchphrase to use, if you don't want to use self-disclosure, is other clients I've worked with have found that, or lots of people have told me that, or I wonder if you might consider the ideas from Islam that tells us about this, but you're not actually saying this is what I say, this is what I believe. You're just introducing that there might be different viewpoints. So certainly in dynamic psychology and psychotherapy, you wouldn't use any level of self-disclosure at all, but it's got to feel comfortable to you, and authentic, so we're not sharing more than we feel comfortable with, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I fully agree. Like you wouldn't want to just overbear on the client, and sometimes bringing extra details from yourself might be embarrassing on your part. So bringing like an external source. Oh, these therapists also think that you should do this thing, and so on and so forth.
Great. So, in terms of whatever role you end up pursuing, it's often really useful to have relevant experience roles. So, have you got plans
Yeah.
to start doing some sort of clinically-ish relevant work on the side of your degree, or, roles that you might think about applying for? It probably feels quite distant. We're talking about 4 years' time, but have you got roles you're considering or would consider?
Like in terms of just internships, you mean, right?
So in this country, we might have support work in psychiatric hospitals or home
Mm,
care, or teaching assistant or assistant
yeah.
psychologist. There's a whole, psychological wellbeing practitioners. I don't know if that training's yet started coming to the Middle East, but there's a whole variety of relevant experience. And I guess I wondered what the flavour of that kind of work is looking like at the moment.
Yeah. So basically, like in the Middle East, like I've said, unfortunately, there's not as much experience as in the UK. Even getting jobs, sometimes I've heard even for like because I live in the UAE, of course. So sometimes even for national students, it's a bit hard like to always get a job on the spot. Sometimes you need connections or mutuals in order that like can get you a job. Sometimes you really need like a qualification. You really need the university degree in order for people to accept you. I swear, I think I've seen maybe only one person under 18 that's actually been able to find a job. Other than that, though, generally speaking, like internships aren't that easy to find here. Maybe if the university offers you something directly, like volunteering, for example. But I don't know if is volunteering considered like summer internship work in the UK. Like,
So honorary experience is absolutely relevant, but what can sometimes be tricky with honorary experience is that sometimes it's fewer hours a week, because of course people need to be able to make a living. And so when we're looking at counting how many months or full-time equivalent months people have had, it sometimes takes a lot of work to even add up to a couple of months. And so that's why it can be deemed as less favorable, because unless you're working full-time every day for free 5 days a week, which many people can't and shouldn't have to afford to do, then it's tricky to get the same amount of experience, if that makes sense. So it's very much useful. So I did an honorary assistant post, and I did that by taking a day a week of annual leave from my paid role over 10 weeks, so 10 days. But whilst on paper that didn't look like, that's not even a month, but actually in terms of my life, that was 3-ish months, maybe even going on for 4, depending on how spaced out it was. But in terms of my understanding about psychology and my confidence in talking about psychology and psychology terms, and having a reference to put on my form that was a clinical psychologist, and just my confidence in talking about all of that stuff and feeling like I could talk the talk and walk the walk. So in terms of what I got from those 10 days, I would say it was massive. But on paper, it looked like less than a month's experience. So we don't always do it for how many months on our form it looks like. We do it for the massive leaps and bounds that it helps bring on our development. So, I couldn't at that time afford to not be working, but I decided I could take the hit of having 2 weeks less annual leave that year. So, still a little bit more rubbish because for the rest of the year I had less annual leave, but actually being in that role really energized me anyway. I loved doing that. And so I felt like it was worth it.
Wait, so you worked for 10 days over a span of almost 4 months, but you still say that like even though it might have been really exhausting or draining, it still really helped you out even till now?
Yeah, so I was working for a local government. I was working for the council, so I'd usually work Mondays to Fridays, 9 to 5. But I'd negotiated with my basically I knew of a clinical psychologist that was sort of working with some of my clients. And so I'd emailed her and said, is there any chance you'd consider taking me on in an honorary, I'll take some annual leave? And we wrangled a bit, and then eventually she said yes. So yeah, I then negotiated with my workspace to allow me to be essentially part-time for 10 weeks so that I could take every Monday off to go and work under a clinical psychologist. So it's no more exhausting in terms of me doing days of work in a week. But of course, one of the key ways to not burn out as a human, let alone an aspiring psychologist, is to make sure that you take your annual leave. And of course, that was 2 weeks worth of annual leave that I then wasn't able to take because I'd taken it doing honorary work. Does that make more sense?
Yeah. So you used up the 2 weeks of your annual leave during your internship, during your work, sorry. So then therefore
that's
like you
what
didn't have
allowed
a
me to
holiday or
not
an actual
be.
rest.
Yeah, it allowed me to not be at work. So I was on annual leave. I wasn't getting paid by the honorary service, but I was getting paid for my normal role. So it didn't lead to any diminished income for me.
Okay. I think I understand now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of, I've just shared a little tip for reducing burnout is make sure you use your annual leave. Have you got any tips to help you reduce burnout as an aspiring psychologist? Because, when you look ahead, you said before we started recording, it feels like, 10 years time, it might be like in a good place. But at the moment, it feels like it's like, on the distant horizon. So how are you reducing and avoiding burnout?
Yeah, it feels so close yet it's so far. I think I only speak from a student's experience, but for me, I feel like setting up a routine, even if you don't always follow it, like for me personally, I feel like it's helped a lot. So I don't like lose track of time, and I don't waste or sit around and like not do something. I also feel like in terms to avoid burnout, like just doing something like in the middle. Like some people do Pomodoro, but personally, I've never been able to do that exactly. Fix 25 and then 5, then 25, then 5. It's been hard for me to do that. But just having some other system.
You call it Pomodoro?
Have you heard of it? I always
No.
saw it on YouTube. So it's basically this study or work technique. A lot of people do, or some people do, where you study for 25 minutes, you have a break for 5, you study for 25, you have a break for 5, then you study for 25, then you have a break for 5 again. And then when you study for 25 minutes the fourth time, then you have a 30-minute break. So this is basically what some people do to study for like a full day or half a day or something. So they study for 25 minutes, then 5-minute break, like 3 times in a row. Then when they study 25 minutes the fourth time, they take a 30-minute break instead of a 5-minute. So yeah, but I personally was never able to do that.
Yeah,
but,
I used to do something similar with myself, but with Mars bars. When I was to encourage me to study, I would reward myself with Mars bars, which, probably not advisable, but in short-term bursts, it worked for me.
Oh yeah, it's just getting candy. Like, well, what else could you want? Like something so simple that's so nice.
Yeah. Khaled, thank you so much for coming along to the podcast and sharing your wisdom and your thoughts and the way you see the world. It's been a real pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me here.
You're welcome. Welcome back. Thanks for listening or watching, depending on which you're doing. I'd love to know what you think about this episode, whether it's evoked anything for you. And if it has, please do come along on the Aspiring Psychologist Community (free) group on Facebook. And I'd love to catch up with you there. Do take a moment, if you are listening as a podcast, or even if you're not, if you're watching on YouTube, still to leave me a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, the Aspiring Psychologist podcast show. That would be really appreciated. Please do bear in mind that the books, the Clinical Psychologist Collective and the Aspiring Psychologist Collective, can be useful for whatever stage you're at with your journey, whether it is that you've got interviews or that you're still carving out your career and gaining your experience, ready to apply to some other area of psychology or indeed clinical psychology in future. People have said that they're really useful for helping them think about reflecting, and for also thinking about other opportunities and avenues for jobs. So somebody contacted me recently to say they're just starting a new role and they feel so excited, and it was actually reading those books that gave them the idea of that, of even searching for that role. So good things happen and lives are changing because of this podcast, which is wonderful. The same can be said for people within the Aspiring Psychologist membership that feel like they got interviews this year because of the work that we've been doing to help coach them and to help supercharge their abilities and their confidence. So do please consider coming on board if you think that would be useful for you. It's £30 a month, but with no minimum term. So thank you so much for listening, watching, whatever it is you're doing. I will look forward to catching up with you for our next episode, which will be available for you from Monday at 6 a.m. Thanks for being part of my world, and I'll see you very soon. Take care.